but for them to meet all the time and talk about it and figure out ways on how let's invest in a digital new digital currency so we can counter the US dollar is quite interesting. So and then now that we have a president who's investing in tariffs, they're really looking into, okay, how do we expedite this as much as possible. It is
Yeah.
difficult, but it is something that I think that conversation is not going to go away. They're going to invest in it more. And and you're seeing our competitors, Russia and China, who's engaging with the rest of the world, attracting more of them to be part of these conversations as far as how do we erode the U.S. dollar dominance. So yes, quite interesting. Thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, yeah. One day I'll do a deep dive on this, but one thing that's interesting to me is there's I think that there's a fragile barrier that's protecting the United States economic sovereignty in the sense that what happens is whenever the conversation comes up, I listen to a lot of financial experts. I'm constantly taking in information. Whenever there's a conversation about people moving away from the dollar, moving away from mostly treasury bills as a place to store value, it almost always comes down to this idea that there's no replacement for the United States. Our markets are super deep and liquid. We have the rule of law. We have a separation. The Fed has not been politicized. Things like that. And one beef I would take up with Trump in terms of arguing how he's going to hurt America long term is he's kind of undermining a lot of that. He's been talking openly about getting rid of the Fed chair and putting his own little puppet in place of him and all that. And what that does is that makes people start to say, okay, so the US, you're kind of becoming just like China. Right. And so the only reason that we would put our money in the US instead of China is because we thought you guys had some sort of respect for institutional barriers that allow for our money to be safer and not be overly politicized and for crazy things to happen. And Trump, unfortunately, has destabilized that. So if I'm China, I say, hey, look, I know you don't like the fact that we're not a democracy, but neither is the United States, right? You don't like the fact that, we like to nationalize our businesses. But look at what the United States is doing. Look at what they did with Intel and these other companies, right? I know you don't like the fact that we may interfere with monetary policy. Just get the United States, right? And also we're not going to give you a hard time. We're not going to tell you that we're mad at you because you don't because you're not carrying the flag for gay people or whatever. Like we don't care how you feel about gay rights or any of these other issues, which are important issues, but the Chinese don't interfere with that. Whereas the United States is like, if we don't like your policy on sexuality, we'll put sanctions on you, right? So I think that what's going to happen is I think people are going to get tired of the United States overplaying its hand, and eventually 30, 40, 20, 30, 40 years down the line, you will see the dollar decline in power. Not so much because we've necessarily made these tragic mistakes, but because the dollar never should have been that powerful in the first place. I
Mm,
mean, literally those wars, the way World War One and World War Two turned out, we literally were able and allowed to create the whole global economic order. And it
yes.
leaned in our favor, and it's shown itself